The analogy that I came up with is that we're all working on a giant tapestry, and it's slow and it's intricate and it needs a lot of people working on it. But if we can just focus on just stitching our own little section and just putting one stitch after another, we will create change because all those little stitches add up.
Welcome to The Greener Way. I'm your host, Rose Mary Petrass, Senior Journalist at FS Sustainability. We are recording on Gadigal land. We pay our respects to traditional custodians of country and elders past, present and emerging. Last week we had Emma Pringle on the show talking about how ESG investors view dysfunctional workplaces and the effect of company culture on financial performance. This week we continue in the conversation around work, but this week's a little different. We're speaking with an ESG and responsible investment specialist on changing careers. Belinda recently started company side as Director of Investor Relations and ESG at Telix Pharmaceuticals. Welcome to the show, Belinda White.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Belinda, sustainability and ESG is in some ways such a new field. I'm sure many of our listeners relate to the experience of changing careers to move into this field. And some might be listening to this podcast while considering or actively looking for a career change into this field. You started out in comms and then you went to responsible investing at First Sentier. Can you walk us through your career path and how you landed at Telix in an ESG role?
Yes, it is a little bit circuitous. My background is in communications, particularly public relations and communications consulting as agency side for a long time. And then I went in, I specialized in investment and I went eventually in-house in investment. And by one way or another, I ended up at First Century Investors in their communications team. I went in for a 2-month contract in January 2020.
Right.
6 weeks later, we were all locked down. And I ended up staying there 4 years.
Oh, wow.
The first part of that, I was in the communications team. And I did a lot of work with the responsible investment team. I was working really closely with Kate Turner in particular. We were working on thought leadership. We wrote a really timely paper at the time, RI in a post-COVID world. It's a bit dated now, maybe. And then we were doing things like the RI report. And I just had a lot of interest and passion for the area. And Kate knew that. And then eventually she invited me into her team on secondment because the team was growing fast as the workload was growing as well. And then I ended up in a full-time role there. So it was a really big learning curve, and I really threw myself into not just the role at First Centre, but also the industry itself. I became quite involved in the Responsible Investment Association, worked on some projects with them on investor toolkits. The first one was on armed conflict, and the second one was on AI and its investor implications. So, I really went hard on the ESG and RI side of things. And then the team was restructured and I lost my job there. But it was a good opportunity for me to do something different. And I ended up at Telix Pharmaceuticals, which is a radiopharmaceuticals company. I'll give you a little primer on what that means because it's a very new area really, and a lot of people don't understand it. But essentially, we're improving and extending the lives of patients through precision oncology. And what that means is using radiopharmaceuticals to diagnose and deliver therapy to see and treat cancer. So it's pretty groundbreaking. It's very targeted. It's sort of known as theranostics. And it's an really exciting space to be in at the moment. The company has been going through a lot of growth. And so I've joined to really help communicate our story to investors on the investor relations side, but I have an additional focus on ESG to communicate what we're doing, how we measure it, to answer questions from investors about how we approach it.
Okay. Tell us about your new role day to day. I'm particularly interested in what transferable skills you utilize, that you took with you from your previous roles and how you apply that to now working in ESG.
The ongoing theme in my career is taking lots of complex information and lots of different strands of information and bringing them together in a way that shapes a narrative. So it's sometimes it's about simplifying it, but sometimes it's about giving it a structure. And so people understand what it is that we're working on and what it means for them and how it benefits them. And so whether I was in PR agencies or whether I was, in different asset classes in investment, that's always been the skill that I bring. And that's very much what it is now. So whether we're trying to explain, the intricacies of radioisotopes or, communicating with investors about how we approach climate change, it's taking that complexity and being able to sort of see through it and see where the narrative lies and how best we can communicate that. And I think the other thing is communication's not a one-way thing. You always have to understand what your audience wants and what they need, and so have a dialogue with them. And what I've always focused on is thinking about, okay, not just like what's the story we want to tell, but what's the story that they want to hear, what's going to be useful to them. And sometimes that, you have to ask, what it is that you want to hear, that they want to hear from you.
Well, my next question was going to be why communication skills are so important, but I think you've already answered that. Unless there's something else you want to say on that.
I think I'd probably talk my own book here, but, a lot of ESG and RI is about influencing people because there's a lot of encouraging them to change and adopt new practices and new approaches. And, communication is key to that. Educating people is also a really important part of what we do. So those RIA toolkits that I worked on, they were very much about taking topics that are sort of quite at the cutting edge and researching them and bringing them together and giving people a practical framework to think about them and apply them in their investments. So the value that I brought to that process was helping to bring all that information together and give it some coherence. A lot of it is just about bringing people on the journey because like what we do know about ESG is that everybody has a view and often they're opposing views. So communication is really important in helping people find common ground and coming to a place where everyone, is happy to move forward on a particular issue or, with a particular process.
So now you've worked on both sides of the investor and also company side kind of relationship. You've worked on both sides. So I'm interested in what the biggest misconceptions from both sides may have about each other and, how you can kind of take that to inform more effective stakeholder relationships.
Yeah, I think when I was on the investor side, I would look at a company's sustainability report or, a materiality matrix, and I would think, well, why aren't they doing enough about this or why aren't they more active on this? But when you're within an organization, you really see the complexity and there's so many strategies and priorities that a company is working on at any given time. And ESG issues are just one part of a long list of things they're dealing with. And so while from the outside it might seem like a no-brainer to sort of set a climate target or boost their diversity in their management team, there's a lot of elements that go into making that work and to getting consensus, getting the information you need to build a plan and then effecting change. So it's about understanding the complexity and just, that it might seem like a small ask from the outside, but from the inside, there's a lot of moving parts to get that going. I think what's nice at a company like Telix is, we have a North Star, which is patients. Like I say to people, oh yeah, we're curing cancer. But we have, or, we can have a materiality matrix, but when we line up what we're doing we always ask what's in the best interest of the patients that we're trying to help.
Do you have any advice for people looking to make a career change into a more meaningful or impactful role or company in a time when ESG roles seem to be in such high demand?
One of the lessons I learned very early in my career actually is that you actually have to put your hand up. You have to go above and beyond what your role description is.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't necessarily mean working harder or working extra hours, but if there's a task force or a committee or, someone asks for volunteers for a particular project, that's where you get out of your own team. You make connections across the organization.
Mm-hmm.
People understand what you're interested in. So I'm a really big one for putting up your hand for other things.
Mm-hmm.
And being really vocal about your interests so that people think of you, even if you're not necessarily working on that topic. If something comes up in that area, then people will think of you. So, for example, if you are a slightly loudmouth feminist like I am, people, when they're thinking about diversity initiatives and, elevating women in the organization, they know I have a point of view on it. And that became a key focus for me in the responsible investment team. So I would just, without getting on a hobby horse, it's good for people to know that you have an interest in particular topics.
Mm-hmm.
And the other really important one is to build relationships outside of your team.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's going to the social events, whether it's chatting to people in the kitchen, if you sort of just stay in your own little lane, you won't hear about opportunities, but people won't notice you either.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this a lot with particularly younger people who are reasonably new to the workforce. They haven't thought, I hate the word personal brand, but they haven't thought about how they can get other people in the organization to notice them.
Right.
And it goes back to this kind of volunteering thing. Even if it's just for the social committee, that's the way that you build relationships beyond just the people in your team. And it's so important. And it applies outside of the industry. So go to the ESG drinks, go to the RIA conferences, join the working groups. Don't just limit yourself to what you do in the office,
Mm-hmm.
because those relationships are what will build your career. And also they're the relationships that will be there if you are made redundant, if you do lose your job.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the relationships that are built on genuine, trust and mutual admiration. It's not just a transactional thing of, oh, well, I know such and such, I better give them a call because they might give me something. It's,
right.
Having that real interest in building friendships and relationships outside just the people in your team.
I'm curious if there are any particular resources or particular training that you can recommend that helped you in your career journey.
I've just been really lucky to have really good leaders who have, I did academic work as well. One decision I made was, my background is I've got an arts degree. I majored in Latin and French and English and history. And so I took myself off and I did some postgrad in investment so that I could have conversations with portfolio managers and know what I was talking about. But I would say find people who you can learn from and let them know that you are open to receiving feedback. One of my mentors, Tom Buchan, he taught me a lot about having gravitas because I am, I'm a bubbly blonde trying to make my way in the world of investment. And he taught me a lot about how to get people to take you seriously, how to build relationships with them. There's no school for that, right? So, align yourself with people who you want to learn from and who you look up to. And they don't have to be your line manager. They might be someone else in the organization.
Right.
Most people like to share their knowledge. So I really highly recommend people to, ask for advice, ask for feedback.
Is there anything else you want to add about your career in ESG?
I think that in ESG, the issues can be so big and complex, and progress can be very slow. And, we often, are at industry events and we're all a bit downcast. But the analogy that I came up with is that we're all working on a giant tapestry, and it's slow and it's intricate and it needs a lot of people working on it. But if we can just focus on just stitching our own little section and just putting one stitch after another, we will create change, because all those little stitches add up and we will see progress. And then, we've got to just keep making the stitches.
What a beautiful analogy. Where can people connect with you and find out more about what Telix Pharmaceuticals is doing with regards to ESG as well?
You can definitely look at the Telix Pharmaceuticals website and our sustainability report, but you can always find me on LinkedIn, Belinda White, Telix Pharmaceuticals. Pretty easy to find. Always happy to connect.
Until next time then, I'm Rose Mary Petrass, and thank you for listening to The Greener Way.
The Greener Way podcast is a product of FS Sustainability, a show about people, the planet, and investing in our collective future. All information in this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. The Greener Way podcast gives listeners access to information and educational content provided by discussing numerous financial sustainable options and our featured guests. It is not intended as a substitute for professional, legal, or tax advice. The hosts of The Greener Way are not financial professionals and are not aware of your personal financial circumstances. Before making any financial decisions, you should read the product disclosure statement and, if necessary, consult a licensed financial professional. For more information, head to the disclaimer page on the FS Sustainability website, fssustainability.com.au.